Zoom protocol, so as people trickle in. But hi, my name is Abby Kachambas-Hiramat. I am the Transportation Policy Analyst for the MPO, and this is the November meeting of the Transit Working Group. Lauren, if you can go to the next slide. So our notice of non-discrimination, you are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. Next slide. Our accessibility statement, we want everyone to know that this meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in the meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Lauren McGee, NPO staff at lmagee@ctps.org or 857-702-3706 for phone, or via the chat box on Zoom. And next one. Yeah, there we go. And so lastly, our Zoom guidelines. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, your last name, and your affiliation. To participate in the discussion, please select the raised hand function. You can find the raise hand function by clicking either on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom, or on the reactions toolbar, reactions button in the toolbar. And if you're joining us from the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And that's that. So first things first, I think with so many of us, I think it might be better to skip verbal introductions, but if people could put into the chat box sort of how you renamed yourself, your name and where you're joining us from, like what organization you're a part of, or if you're just a transit enthusiast. Right, so while folks are doing that, we can move on to our main presentation for today, which is on pulse points and headway management for fixed route service. And we have the wonderful Katie Calandriello. I'm not 100% sure if I say your name right.
That's right. You're good.
Oh, awesome. Who is the program manager and policy analyst for Transit Matters, which is an advocacy organization, an advocacy and research organization in the Boston area that focuses on improving public transportation. And with that, I will hand it over to Katie. On the next slide, Lauren.
Thanks everyone for coming. I'm excited to, I think, meet some new faces and see some familiar ones as well. But just for some background, I'm Katie Calandriello. I've been at Transit Matters for almost 2 years. I started in January 2023, so I'm kind of just rounding up right now. And for those who aren't as familiar with Transit Matters work, we do a lot of transportation advocacy in Massachusetts, with our main focus being on the MBTA, but we do try to dip our toes into RTA work and regional rail. I lead our bus team and our mobility hubs team. About 70% of my work is focused on bus, but I do some other projects. For example, I'm working with the city of Boston right now on their Go Hubs expansion, so adding mobility hubs throughout the city, intended to support Fairmount electrification come 2028. But for bus, why you're all here, I'm here to talk about pulse points, but it's a little difficult to talk about pulse points without headway management, which isn't exactly its antithesis or opposite, but more of its complement. And these are
Katie, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. I think you might be breaking up a little bit, or that might just be me. I don't know if other people are having issues.
If I turn my camera off, is that better?
Not particularly.
Is anyone else having trouble?
I think it might be something with your microphone, maybe.
Yeah, it's like really
the
staticky, that's all.
Muffled or something.
If you give me just a moment, I can grab my headphones and try to connect.
Of course, okay. Take all the moments you need.
I'll be back in just a second. Sorry for the interruption. folks hear me better now?
Yes, much.
Yes. Okay, great, awesome. Yay, I'm glad that worked. But yes, as I was saying, headway management and pulse points, they're both operational practices, but more complements to each other rather than opposites or antithesis of each other. So for headway management, this is intended to work on buses that are more frequent, so headways of 15 minutes or less. And so it's intended for riders that you can just hop on the bus whenever, so you don't have to look at a schedule, you don't have to plan your trip. For example, the One Bus would be a great candidate for this, a bus that's, you know, a cross town route that is super crucial, has tons of ridership, but gets bunched sometimes or doesn't have the best operational practices because it's trying to adhere to a schedule. But riders should be able to just walk out of their homes or walk out of their offices or walk out of a store or school and, you know, wait for the bus for an amount of time that they don't have to be like, where's this bus or when's it coming? Let me look at the schedules. So that's the intention here. And it's meant to dispatch buses based on the headways rather than a fixed schedule. That way, when traffic happens or buses get bunched or there's a road closure and that kind of messes up our schedule, there can be a responsive team that sends out buses when needed. On the other hand, we have pulse points, and this is intended for more low frequency routes. So about that like 20, 30-minute headway or greater. And it's intended to have a clock face schedule, so it's easier for riders to remember, plan their trips on. But yeah, it makes these connections much less strenuous. So if you have, you know, two routes that are both running at 30-minute frequencies and you can't catch that second bus right when you get off, it can add, you know, 20, 30 minutes to your trip, and that can disincentivize riders from using public transit. Next slide, please. So we've definitely focused most of our advocacy at Transit Matters with headway management, just because the urban core is where most of our riders are. It is where there's a lot of transit advocacy momentum. And with the nature of headway management being for more frequent buses, this has kind of become the forefront. And also, sorry, I'm purple. This is just the nature of being a nonprofit and not having a great computer. But yeah, so we focused most of our efforts on headway management. This past spring, we had a report come out, the Pokey Schleppy Awards. This was not our original idea. We did steal this from the group Strap Hangers in New York City, but it's a data analysis of the slowest and most bunched buses in the MBTA system. For those who ride the MBTA system quite frequently, this list here on the right probably, you know, confirms your experience as a rider. The One Bus is the slowest and most bunched. The 66 is on here twice. The 19, it has some of the highest stops per mile on the entire system, hence slowing it down. But yeah, this data analysis is really important for confirming rider experience, which is, you know, a key value at Transit Matters because we're a data-driven transportation advocacy organization. And we had a fun little cheeky event where we did an award ceremony honoring community organizations that, you know, serve around the areas where the One Bus serves. And here in the middle, we just have a little bus photo booth that we did that was a lot of fun. And next slide, please. A few other things that we've done in regards to headway management. Our most recent project down here at the bottom, the pilot proposal, this we actually released on Tuesday, but this was a suggestion to do a headway management pilot on the 22 bus. And we chose the 22 because it runs almost entirely on its own bus priority infrastructure. So it kind of controls for these other factors, such as traffic or, you know, poor lights that could add different effects to a pilot. So that's one of our suggestions here. And in our analysis too, we identified this in the Pokey Schleppy report, that there weren't really many other external factors making it the fourth most bunched bus in our system other than purely operational issues. Also, as you know, not being a government organization, we're able to get a little memey with it. So we try to make accessible and funny memes online. So people who, you know, at the end of the day, not everyone's going to care what headway management is. It is an operational term, and we know that the operation stuff just isn't the most sexy stuff to talk about when it comes down to transit, but we do want to make our mission accessible to everyone. So we try to reach everyone through some form of comedy, and definitely a perk of being a private organization, so we can post funny stuff online without much approval. And then lastly, we do have a lot of volunteers who help us write op-eds. So up here, this is an op-ed that one of our volunteers wrote about headway management and how to end bus bunching. And this was in Commonwealth Beacon a little over a year ago. Next slide, please. So on to pulse points. These, if you looked at our report, these are like the 3 areas that we suggest to have pulse points in the MBTA system. Starting with Lynn, this is kind of like the hub for the North Shore. So we thought this was a really great fit. There are so many folks who are, discouraged from mode shift or discouraged from taking a trip because a lot of these buses that go into Lynn, besides the 442, which is pretty frequent and will become a key route under bus network redesign, the frequencies are just not enough to get you to where you need to go or allow you to conveniently make a connection or ensure that you can connect to the commuter rail or this frequent 442 bus or another bus that just brings you to the Blue Line, for example. And when we did write this too, this was before I believe they had announced like the formal location of the Lynn Interim Station. But you can still have a pulse here in Lynn, even with the commuter rail moved over just, I think it's a quarter, half mile down the street. You just have to add that extra time that it does take for someone to walk from the bus hub in Central Square in Lynn to the new commuter rail station or interim commuter rail station on Friend Street down the block. Another location too where we suggest a pulse point is in Waltham. This is really important here just because the Fitchburg line is really infrequent. It's hour frequencies during the week, 2 hours on weekends. So it's already hard to catch that train as is, let alone if you're trying to go from bus to train. We have seen also a reduction in express buses too over the past few years, but a lot of the remaining express buses in our system are in Waltham. And then of course we do have the 70 bus, which is one of the longest routes in the system, I believe too, and connects folks from Waltham to Watertown, Lower Alston, and then Central Square and Cambridge. So a really important connection there. But we want to just like maximize the availability of all these connections because we know Waltham isn't going to be, the highest priority for the MBT when it comes to improving transit. But we do need to maximize the resources we do have there. And here a pulse point would, add the most optimal way to get riders to get on the bus and also treat the riders who do have no other choice but to use public transit with dignity. And then lastly, here we have Quincy Center as a suggestion. At the time that we wrote this, actually, the Red Line had, I think, record amount of added time because of slow zones. Because we wrote this in May and the peak was about in late April. So when we were finishing up this report, so we were like, okay, we really need to suggest something for the Red Line because at the time, it looked like there was no end in sight for the slow zones. There was no track and improvement plan yet. I don't think we had any update on the CRRC contract really at this time. Since then, they kind of, reissued that contract and we now have, 2 of those Red Line cars running in our system, which is awesome. But at the time that we wrote this was, not even in our vision. We were just still pushing the T to like acknowledge that these slow zones existed. But regardless of whether the Red Line was slow and now, so much better and in great shape, a pulse point still would be really great here in Quincy Center because there's a lot of buses that do lead to surrounding communities that have low frequencies that could really benefit from having coordinated connections, allowing folks to reduce the wait time in between trips, making trips so much faster for riders. And next slide, please. And we do have an upcoming report coming out, probably early 2025. But like I said, Transit Matters has been trying to dip our toes into RTA advocacy a bit more this past year. So one of our first reports coming out centered around RTA, the MW RTA. We chose them just because they have a really small budget. They're one of the newest RTAs, I think the newest RTA in our state. And Jim Nee, their general manager, has a really exciting vision that we're excited to work with. But in this report, we have a vision for the MWRTA where we start with, low-hanging fruit, low-cost upgrades, which we suggest through our mobility hubs vision of just upgrading a few bus stops that are really important key transfer points, with features like bike racks and more seating and shelters and information just to improve rider experience. And then longer term, high level suggestions like routing, and of course operations, where we do suggest a pulse point at their Blandon hub station, which is conveniently really close to the commuter rail station, and would create a really effective pulse for that network, optimizing the limited resources that they do have as an RTA. Next slide, please. So what we need to get there. I'll start with the bus priority infrastructure. So because buses would need to adhere to a clock face schedule here, again, to make it easier for riders to understand and easily make these connections, a bus would have to get to its pulse on time. So if there are areas where there's traffic or a horrible intersection, bus priority infrastructure could be needed as well. And then also coordination with commuter rail or other transportation network. We heard from BAT, the Brockton Area and Transportation, a while ago that there was trouble coordinating with commuter rail, but we actually have now heard that there's a much more streamlined flow of communication with them, because they would change their schedules and then all of a sudden the RTAs wouldn't have good notice and they'd have to change their schedules on the fly to try to coordinate service. But it's really exciting to hear that now there is a much more streamlined flow of conversation and these things are actually happening. And BAT has a really amazing pulse that we reference in our report, and definitely a model for other RTAs as well. And then here I have money, but emphasis on the sometimes, because pulses can be extremely scalable. One of the most notable examples too in the US is in Cleveland, and their pulse, it is quite large and robust. So they had to kind of reduce some frequencies on buses and increase frequencies on other buses to create this pulse where everything was a coordinated transfer. But within that process, there was overall a net increase that did require them to spend more money on this. But for example, at a lower scale, if you have 3 buses and let's say one comes to the shared point at 610, one at 620, and one at 630, and you're just pushing one up to 620 and one down to 620, that hopefully wouldn't cost a significant amount of money, other than, more general costs of communicating this change with riders, changing printed schedules, but hopefully nothing that would bankrupt an agency. And then of course here I have Agencyville. As a transportation advocacy nonprofit, we couldn't not put this on here, but strong leaders and people who are listening to riders and willing to make these changes are a really crucial step into driving these operational changes. And next slide, please. And then I tried to cover these things too when going through our case studies in Lynn, Waltham, and Quincy Center, but just reiterating why pulses are important. They make these connections between buses or bus to commuter rail or bus to rapid transit or vice versa much less strenuous for riders, because they don't have to wait in between this transfer as much. And that also does increase rider satisfaction. Furthermore, that also would reduce your trip time so people can get where they need to go faster. And then together, these 2 points also drive mode shift, because if folks can get somewhere where they need to go faster or have a less strenuous trip, they're more likely to see public transportation as a viable option, which is really important for driving mode shift, especially in areas where it's not optimal to have a 15-minute frequency bus everywhere. And also on here, I have maximize the efficiency of limited resources. As much as I would hope that we could live in a world where every transit agency doesn't have to worry about a fiscal cliff or whether or not they can run a bus with 10-minute frequencies over 20-minute frequencies. It's unfortunately not the world that we live in right now. We're trying to work on changing that. But while resources are limited, this is a pretty, it could be done low cost way to maximize the efficiency of the resources, but also improving the service too, just where that high level frequency just isn't optimal. We know right now that a bus from Saugus to Lynn isn't going to become a key route under bus network redesign, as nice as that would be. But we can make that ride as easy and less strenuous as possible, regardless of it having low ridership or not as much opportunity. But I think that is everything that I had.
I was muted. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. Actually, Lauren, if you could go back one to just kind of the end of just to keep it in people's minds for a discussion portion. I guess I might have missed this, but could you say, like, in kind of like the most dumbed down way possible, what a pulse point looks like? So it's like a mobility hub where all bus routes converge at a certain time. They wait a certain amount of time for people to make their transfers, and then they go back to their standard routes.
Yeah. So what? That's pretty much it. Yeah. So for example, I'll give a more limited example. Say there's two routes that connect near a commuter rail station. Ideally, what it would look like is that these two bus routes would get to that commuter rail station like a minute or two before it should arrive, give time for riders to get off the bus, get on the commuter rail, and vice versa, get off the commuter rail and get on the bus. So that way that connection of rail to bus or bus to rail is seamless as possible, and it reduces any wait times or missing the bus from one connection to the other. But yes, that is the vision of what a pulse point would look like. But yeah, very scalable, so it can be 10 bus routes, it could be 2, it could be with rail, doesn't have to be, but yes, that is the intended purpose.
Great. Yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions. You can raise your hand, you can put them in the chat if anybody has any thoughts. Susan.
I feel like I'm always the chatty one.
No, it's good.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate this so much. I'm so glad you guys are educating people about pulse points. So I work in the town of Lexington, where we've had a municipal public bus service since 1979, and it is always run with pulse points because we are only every hour. And there was also times in our history where even less frequent than every hour. So, and within our little tiny system, which is essentially a 3-bus system, all those buses meet up in our depot area, and then they'll all depart currently at 30 minutes after the hour. We also tried to make it so that we could meet up with the Lowell RTA because they're also only every hour. So we conscientiously timed our service so that we could meet up with them over at Leahy Burlington for connections. The one downside when you're different agencies trying to meet up is we have no way, like if the LRTA is a little off schedule, we have no way to coordinate and like us sit and wait or they sit and wait. We do that with our own buses, but we can't do that with other ones. And I do agree if there was any way we could get the MBTA or really all services, because we're like on the fringe of MBTA. So our folks are transferring between a variety of different services. But if everybody could get to pulse points, this would make clock face scheduling. This would make things so much easier. Currently, this is my last point, we don't have any buses that go to commuter rail where we are. We're surrounded by towns with commuter rail, but we don't have any buses that go there because even though someday it would be really nice to have that, right now it would be really hard to time a bus and have it stick to a clock face schedule and meet up with commuter rail because commuter rail, the schedule just doesn't really work for that. So I appreciate your advocacy and your education on this topic. Thank you.
Of course, and thank you.
Yeah, it's something that Jen Watts put in the chat. So if someone's on the bus and they're making the commuter rail connection, or vice versa, someone's getting off the commuter rail and the bus connection isn't necessarily running on time, I guess, like, what would be the best course of action? Would it be ideal for the buses to sort of just keep running on their clock face schedule, or is Pulse Points supposed to have like a level of flexibility where they could wait for 5 minutes or something like that?
Ideally, there would be a level of flexibility, if, someone were to make their pulse. I know it's hard because a commuter rail dispatcher can't quite, talk to a bus driver. I know that's hard. But yeah, I think it'd have to be something, close to on the fly. Like if a commuter rail is going to be 20 minutes late, which you would probably know somewhat in advance, especially if you're further down the line, that pulse would end up not, I guess, being successful. But I think ideally, if a bus were to get to the commuter rail station and it's like, oh, it's not here yet, linger for a few more minutes, and then at some point there would be the trade-off of, okay, I need to carry on with my trip, and just drop off these passengers, and hopefully the next bus would then get these folks. But where that trade-off happens, I'm actually not even really sure about. But yeah, eventually there would have to be some trade-off of like when a decision is made to, move on. But yeah, ideally lingering wouldn't be like more than 5 minutes to allow folks to like get on and get off.
Yeah. Is there like, so with that in mind, is there sort of an ideal, or I guess, is it most ideal for 2 or 5 or however many to have relatively similar run times? So if you have obviously like a 45-minute route and a 30-minute route, matching them up will be more difficult, I'm assuming.
It would be, because it'd be hard for them to like backtrack into that pulse. Sometimes though, it could be easier if you have like a 30-minute, if a bus has a 30-minute frequency and like a route that is 30 minutes and then like an hour route, it's easier to pair that out when like the times kind of just like match up with each other. But yeah, 35 and 45 would definitely be difficult for sure.
Great. Christina Heyman from AAA says, do you find that the bus lanes heading to Boston on the Tobin Bridge and in other areas help with traffic flow for buses? I don't know how much you guys have been able to like do any of those measurements or get that data from the T, but if you have any insights.
Yeah, we've actually heard a lot of great successes about the Tobin Bridge bus lane. However, with the 111, a lot of it getting stuck is, in Chelsea, because there's a lot of like non-adherence to the bus lane. So I'd say actually on the Tobin Bridge is we see more adherence, but kind of those bus lanes more on city streets, that's where the efficiency of them has a gray area. We've been huge advocates of automated enforcement. So having the automated ticketing on buses to people violating and driving into bus lanes. Yeah, but that is definitely where sometimes the bus lane isn't always effective. We've heard that the bus lane in the Seaport that the 7 bus runs on, there was so many violations on that bus route, and it ended up really not fully being successful. And it could have had bollards, or if we had automated enforcement, it could have been a lot more successful. But unfortunately, that is kind of the unfortunate side of sometimes bus lanes not working. But the Tobin Bridge one we've heard really great things about.
Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, if nobody has any thoughts or questions, that's also fine. I just want to make sure everybody has the time that they need. I guess a question that I would have is like, if a transit provider were looking to implement this, like where would they start? Like who do you reach out to about this? Is that something that can be done internally? Does this usually require like some sort of consultant? How difficult is it to get this type of thing off the ground?
I guess it depends on which kind of agency is looking into doing this. I would say for an RTA, I would recommend, going to our peer agency, the BAT for sure. Although for someone like MBTA, I think they would need to go to a much larger peer agency for recommendations and advice and like first steps on how to get there. Toronto also did once use pulse points, but since they've grown so much, they've actually reduced that and they've moved away from pulse points. But yeah, I would say reaching out to peer agencies first is definitely the best first step. And I think from there, if they need a consultant, that would be a good second step.
Great. Len.
Yeah, for the MBTA, I'd just suggest reaching out to Melissa DeLay. She's like the top dog when it comes to, service planning. And she's very direct, very accessible, welcoming of new ideas, but she's very knowledgeable and will tell you why your idea probably won't work anytime in the near future, but you will feel heard and you will feel that your idea has been really vetted well, so yeah,
Yes,
just reach out
she's
to
been
her.
a great ally for us.
Yeah, she's been a great ally. Just the highest integrity, most likely, this has come under consideration if for various reasons, has not been implemented. But you know what? If that was a pass, then I think you can make a case for me trying it again and trying it on different scales. But definitely reach out to Melissa, and she'll let you know, and I'll be interested in what she says. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think half the battle sometimes is just saying the same thing over and over and over enough that it kind of just makes its way into the lexicon. So that, I don't know, if you start talking about pulse points now, in 4 years, it might be a common phrase. And then 4 years after that, it might make its way into a long range plan or something like that. But yeah, Wig.
Yeah, I agree with everything that Len said. Also, I think you've probably all the data for these buses and connections is probably available in whatever time frame you need to actually look at, when is it most likely to work, when is it most likely not to work, and what kind of adjustments would need to be made. I think CTPS could look at that in a UPWP study. I also think MIT Transportation Logistics could nail that as well, if that was helpful.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Yes, Jim Aloisi from MIT is actually on our board, so he helps us a lot. So that'd be a great future project with him.
Very cool. Susan.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so since you've been speaking with the MBTA, so what have they said? Do they have any desire to switch to clock-based scheduling, or what do they say about this in the pulse points?
Yeah, so I would, being 100% honest, most of our conversations with MBTA have been in regards to headway management, just with bus bunching being probably our top issue in the past year or so, especially with the drop trip rate being so high. And while the drop trip rate is now decreasing because operator count is going up, but yeah, that has definitely occupied our conversations with the T, and I'm sure, as you all know, they're a little hard to get a hold of. So when we do get our 30 minutes with them, we do end up talking about headway management a bit more. But we haven't been told no, which is really exciting. And we haven't been told this isn't possible. We're never going to do this. They've been great listeners, which is amazing. And we really hope to see a future of both headway management and pulse points. But yeah, being completely honest, pulse points hasn't really occupied our conversations with MBTA. But I'm hoping, in this next year, we can start having those once we hopefully hear positive things in regards to headway management. It's just been a bit of a top issue as well because bus network redesign is rolling out. Yeah. I'm sure, as you all know, on December 15th. And with buses becoming more frequent, we see bunching becoming more of a problem. And we want to just advert that as much as we see that potentially being a crisis. So yes. Not quite had those conversations.
Actually, bus network redesign, one of the things I was thinking about with this, because some people on this call, like me, might be part of the municipal stakeholders group that the MBTA has related to that. And it could be one of those things that we maybe mention, asking them about how will they manage, headways, and in the future phases when they're getting to more of the areas where which are going to be less frequent, will they consider some of these changes? So.
Yes.
So logistically, kind of this. Oh, sorry, Len, did you just put your hand up, or is that from before?
I'm sorry, it's from before. Let me put it down.
Oh,
thank you.
No, that's fine. Yeah, so I guess logistically for headway management, what does that look like? Like dispatch will hold back a bus an extra 5 minutes if one hasn't like made its way through the route properly, or yeah, like what does that look like in the real world?
Yeah, for headway management, it definitely is a lot more complicated and way more hands on deck. That one we definitely can't really make the money argument. It will cost more money. It's a lot more labor hours for dispatchers. I think right now the MBTA has 19. The industry standard is like 32. So they would have to, have about 13 more FTEs to get there, which is a lot of money. And of course, just more buses and more infrastructure. But ideally, what it would look like is, say, for example, there's a 4 o'clock bus and a 4:10 bus, leaving Nubian Square, and the bus that should be leaving at 4 o'clock is coming in late, and then it arrives at 4:08. So it's leaving 8 minutes late. So that also there's a bunch of riders waiting to be picked up that are waiting an extra 8 minutes. So there's way more riders. And then that 4:10 bus, it's still going to leave at 4:10 and then not efficiently use that operator because it's going to be picking up way less people because that 4:08 bus picked up more people than it should have. So what headway management would look like in that example would be that, say that 4 o'clock bus is still late. So they would tell that 4:10 bus, like, hey, we need you to leave early. So then that 4:10 bus would now leave at 4. And then that bus that's arriving at 4:08, they would say, all right, wait here for 2 minutes and then we'll dispatch you. And then say in the middle of the route, say, two buses are getting bunched as they move along a route because of a lot of traffic or, a tree fell on the road. That way they can kind of call that second bus and say, hey, can you linger at Heinz Convention Center for 5 minutes so that bus in front of you can get ahead and you can keep the headways even. That's kind of what that would look like. Additionally, you can deadhead buses. So that's kind of just running non-revenue trips to move around like your stock, really. An example where this would be really greatly used would be on the SL3 because there is the drawbridge in Chelsea that can really throw off buses. So if a bus going towards Chelsea gets stuck at the bridge, we know there's not going to be a bus leaving Chelsea anytime soon because that bus got stuck. But they could, move a bus around and dispatch early to pick up more passengers.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I feel like a lot of the times that I'm on the bus, especially like the 66 or the one, the buses just end up playing kind of like leapfrog. It's like the bus that is behind you like goes in front to pick up the next stop before you get there, so then it's less overcrowded. And so I've always thought that was interesting, like how they communicate with each other to do that sort of leapfrogging.
Yes, I've actually, the Waltham example I had was personally affecting me. I was in physical therapy for most of October, and I was taking the 70 bus quite a lot because the Fitchburg line was just too infrequent for me to plan my doctor visits around it. So I was taking the 70 bus a lot, and I was always blown away by how much it was bunching because I'd get on one after waiting for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden one would pass in front of us that was empty. And I'm like, wow, if only that bus came maybe 10 minutes before I got on this bus and I could have gone to my destination a lot faster and with way less people around me.
Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, concerns? It doesn't necessarily have to be specifically about headway management, but like scheduling writ large, any challenges people are facing. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, not forever. Hold your peace until January.
Or my email, I can put it in the chat if anyone has questions too, if you don't want to hold your peace.
Until January. All right. Yeah. Well, Katie, thank you so much. This was lovely and informative. Yeah, and I'm sure like we'll be hearing more from you. I'm sure you'll be hearing more from us, but I really appreciate you taking the time to describe this today. And as we said before, sort of get the terms into the lexicon, even if it's years and years from now, that anything actually quote unquote happens with it.
And thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Lauren, if you can move forward a couple slides, I think just to members items. Yeah, we've discussed. So members items. Are there any updates on projects people want to share? Any new grant awards or applications? Any events coming up? I know that Susan, there's a transit forum in a couple of weeks. I don't know if you want to talk, like make a pitch for
Sure.
that.
We're hosting a transit forum. It's exactly what it is. We're calling it Beyond the Core, and it is to address transit, outside the urban core. Like, how do we deal with it? How do we move forward and create kind of the future we want with in regards to transit? So we have invited area communities. First started reaching out to people that we've had conversations with already over the past many years. We've been part of transportation studies or working groups or whatever. Invited them, and definitely if anyone in this group wants to come, let me know. Or Abby, I'll send you. I don't know if you have all the info, but I'll make sure you have it if you want to disseminate it. We don't have a huge space. We potentially may get a larger space if needed, but at the moment we have room for 40. And our speakers will be someone from MassDOT, Jonathan Church, who did visit this group. He's the director of transit planning, and we have Lindsay Heffernan, who oversees strategy and policy for the MBTA. And we'll also have the executive director of the MBTA advisory board. And actually, Jared Johnson of Transit Matters, he'll be moderating the whole discussion. And I believe we're going to have a welcome from our state representative, Michelle Socolo. So that's where we're at right now. Happy to disseminate that. And if anyone has questions, if you want, I can drop my email in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. And yeah, I don't know how it ended up on my calendar, but somehow it did.
Oh, great.
I don't even really remember registering for it, but I do have the invite. So
okay, wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah, anything else for folks? For Susan, will there be a Zoom option?
So there won't be a Zoom option, but what we will be doing is we are definitely recording, so via Lex Media, and we'll make that available. And I have a hold on a larger space, just should we max out capacity. So we have a registration link, and we ask people to register just so we can track attendance at that. So yeah. If you want, I can just put that I'll put that in the chat too.
That would also be great. Yeah, and if after this, I'll ask you for like if there's a sign up link or something, and I can put that in the follow up from this meeting.
Yeah. If you go to the thing, I just yeah.
Awesome. Alrighty. So if folks don't have anything else, then we can adjourn. I will see you all in mid-ish January after the holidays. And the topic is to be determined, but it will be relevant to transit. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. Again, thank you to Katie. This has been great, and I will see you all in January.